in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Would you like to go into executive session now?
We do not have enough people for
Okay.
that right now.
Then the next thing is the civil penalty waiver discussion. Or do you want to go to the executive director's report?
You're bleeding either way is fine.
Why don't we go to the executive director's report?
Okay, so there are 3 items on my report today. The first is the annual report. The actual annual report, you'll see the draft at the November meeting. But this is we usually give a couple of instances to look at some of the legislative recommendations that we make. We are directed by statute to make legislative recommendations to the legislature. And so these are the items that are typically, we include them at the end of the annual report, which we issue to the legislature in the beginning of December. So we have 5 legislative recommendations today. 3 of them are recurrence, either from last year or from the last several years. The first one, for example, being required electronic filing for state candidates. Most states currently require electronic filing. Kansas is one of a small handful. The last time I looked, it was just 7 states that did not require electronic filing of campaign finance reports. That was a couple of years ago. This passed the House overwhelmingly a couple of years ago, but Senate leadership has indicated that they have no interest in placing this on the floor as of right now. So it's a recommendation, but one that we won't be pushing, even if approved. The second is the ethics cleanup mega bill. Almost all of these are the same as the ones from last year. There are 2 ones that are slight tweaks. That's A and D, but I'll go through all of them because I know we have people who haven't looked at these before. The first is requiring email addresses. This would be new. Right now, appointments of treasurer don't require email addresses. The statute says that it may be optional. It's 2023. I think everyone can probably access or gain an email address. It's not a barrier to participation, and allowing us another avenue to contact people is beneficial. That seems to be a bit archaic in 2023. B, there's extra language. When an amendment was made in statute, there was some unnecessary words that were left in the statute. C is for paid for attribution on social media. Right now, electronic communication that is done by a candidate, a PAC or party that is distributed to 25 or more people has to have paid for attribution on the item. But by law, it has to occur at the end of the item, which for many social media pages, there is no end. For example, Facebook is a reverse chronological scroll forever, and no one is going to scroll all the way to the bottom of a 10-year-old page to figure out what the paid for is. So correcting that so that the paid for attribution can appear somewhere that's clear and conspicuous on the page is an improvement, and that's where other jurisdictions have gone as well. D is the other new one here. Right now, when a candidate is not going to raise or expend over $1,000, they can file what's called an affidavit of exemption. The statute could have some clarity about when the affidavit can be accepted and the time period it covers. There is something that happens by practice, but in reality, if the statute would provide better clarity there, we would be better served. The recommendation that I put in, and obviously this is your recommendation, so feel free to adjust as you see fit if you think you want to. But the recommendation that I drafted is that an affidavit could be accepted in the calendar year when the election occurs, and it extends through the calendar year of the election cycle. So essentially, if someone is filing an affidavit of exemption for a cycle, then they won't have to file the primary election, the general election, or the January report. And if they run again later on with the same account, they can file a new affidavit. But that creates clear guidelines about what it concludes and what it doesn't. E is a statutory conflict. Quite a while ago, the legislature increased the affidavit limit from 500 to 1,000. There's actually a second statute about what a candidate is supposed to do if they exceed the affidavit limit. That they did not update that statute, however. So right now, technically, you can file an affidavit if you exceed $1,000. If you aren't going to exceed $1,000, but if you exceed 500, you have to file reports, which doesn't make any sense. So that needs to be updated as well. F, there's some extraneous text about some section that hasn't existed for quite some time, that only refers to a section that was removed in statute. G, there is a procedural unintended consequence. This was actually already fixed in last year's bill on the campaign finance side, but it needs to be fixed in the Chapter 46 side where our ethics laws exist, indicating that a hearing must be fixed within 30 days. In reality, we don't always meet every 30 days, and it doesn't serve anyone any benefit to set it immediately and then immediately postpone it. That's in order to meet legislative or to meet that statutory requirement. It was actually removed entirely in the Campaign Finance Act. So the 30-day requirement does not exist anymore on that side. For H, lobbyists they must file all of their reports electronically, except inexplicably they are allowed to register on paper. This really only has come up a couple of times, but it's a bit of a headache when it does, and they aren't technically wrong. They can register on paper, even though I don't know how they create an electronic account at that point. So there's a statutory conflict that causes a little bit of headache that could be resolved easily. In I, there's a statutory conflict that was created in 2018 when civil penalties were there was a shorter grace period and increased penalties for some groups. The time frame for when that civil penalty begins should be cleared up. It seemed the legislative intent is clear, but there's some language that creates an open question about whether or not it's the civil penalty would start from, or the grace period would start from when we can confirm receipt or when we've sent the notice. And in every other instance, it's when we send the notice, and that is clearly the intent of the legislature as well. All of those I would view as cleanup. None of those are substantive in any way. They're fixing statutory issues. Number 3, 4, and 5 are more substantive. 3 is support of federal candidates. Right now, our campaign finance law strictly prohibits using any funds to benefit a federal candidate. And you'll see the text there on 3. It's very broad in terms of a prohibition. It covers quite a bit. I don't really see much anti-corruption benefit to prohibiting state party committees, county party committees, and PACs from buying yard signs for federal candidates, for example, which is something that right now a county party in Kansas cannot legally go buy a sign for a federal candidate, which is something that we don't see an anti-corruption benefit for. That was a recommendation we had last year. We thought it was going to be in the bill, and it ended up getting, due to a drafting mix-up, I believe, ended up being removed from the bill. But 4 and 5 are the new recommendations for this year. Number 4 is requiring campaign account termination. Right now there's no requirement in Kansas to have campaign accounts close at any time. You can keep it open forever as long as you keep filing reports. Right now we have campaign accounts open that are over 32 years old, and there are 44 accounts right now that have been inactive for over a decade. There's a lot of problems allowing these accounts to remain open forever. There's an major auditing issue. For example, there are times where candidates are trying to terminate, and I'll tell you, all my campaign finance staff have dealt with this headache several times, where they're trying to terminate their account, but they have a balance discrepancy, and the bank doesn't have records that they can provide to them to resolve the discrepancy, and there's nothing they can do about it. So something goes unreported or misreported. And it's really no one's fault except for the fact that there was an issue that existed at the time. It creates some unchecked avenues to illegally use one's campaign account for personal benefit, because as long as they're filing reports saying that money is still there, there's nothing indicating that it's not, and they haven't indicated how it was distributed. It also creates issues with contacting the account holder. They do have to file January reports every year, and if you have a 15, 20-year-old account and you move, you're not going to be thinking, oh, I need to update my appointment of treasurer form, which is the only way we have to know who to contact. So this recommendation would require, and again, there's a lot of flexibility here, would require inactive accounts to be zeroed out and closed within 6 years for candidates. That is intentionally a generous number, but ensures that it can't be left open forever. Missouri actually requires closure of accounts within 30 days, which I think is exceptionally short. And I think that there's benefit to allowing someone to keep it open so that they can run again in the next cycle if they want to. Oklahoma requires closure within 2 years if it's a 2-year term, 4 years if it's a 4-year term, and 6 years if it's a 6-year term that they ran for. If you won, you can keep it open. If you've lost and you run again, you can keep it open. But if it's going to sit there inactive for a series of years, then the recommendation here would be that it would be terminated. And the last one is essentially making PACs and party committees responsible for report filing. We had some discussion about this in a civil fine hearing quite a while ago. But right now, candidates and treasurers are legally responsible for ensuring their report is filed properly and timely, but due what I think is probably to a drafting oversight, because I don't understand what the underlying rationale would have been otherwise. Only treasurers are responsible for the filing of PAC and party reports. So really, this recommendation would apply the same language to PACs and parties that apply to candidates. Otherwise, there are plenty of circumstances. We've had times where there was a major discrepancy of, 6 digits that needed to be resolved, but the treasurer is deceased, or for whatever reason, there's the only entity that we can hold is the treasurer. They're the only ones legally responsible for the filing of the report, which is something that I think is worth correcting. So I can take any questions, any thoughts. If people have things they want to change, add, remove, this is the time that we can talk about these. They won't be formally approved until the November meeting, but now is a good time for this discussion, I think.
Judge Helmer, I went ahead and opened the meeting because the chairman and vice chairman were not here, but I would like to turn the meeting over to you at this time. We have approved the minutes and we've done the executive director's report. The executive director would like to do the executive session next because he needs 6 people and I have to leave at 2 o'clock. So with that, you, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
My recommendation would be, if depending on the amount of discussion we have here, we could finish this discussion. And then I know we have Mr. Gallardo on Teams, and he has a civil penalty waiver up for consideration. It'd probably be good to resolve that before moving into executive session, just so we don't have to have him leave the meeting and then come back after executive session. I think it'd be better just to, in recognition of his time.
I will have Mr. Just ask what time he would be able to speak in chat as well.
So I think that we could skip to that. I know it's jumping around a lot, which I don't like to do, and I don't think anyone likes to do.
We're used to that.
But I would think that in terms of appreciating and understanding people's time, I think allowing Mr. Gallardo the waiver request chance to speak and then moving into executive session is probably the order I would recommend.
You sure? Do that. Can you make that 2 o'clock work? Yeah.
Excuse me.
Can you make that 2 o'clock work with this process?
I have to leave at 2
We're gonna stop talking and start moving.
I don't think executive session will take very long, but I've been wrong before. So
okay.
Never, I'm gonna borrow your pen.
absolutely.
So your request then is we move to,
The civil penalty waiver request for Mr. Gallardo
okay, so Mr.
in recognition of his time. He is on Teams. So,
Team. Okay.
Mr. Gallardo, can you hear us?
Sure, we'll then call
Yeah.
Mr. Gallardo's matter. Good afternoon,
You
Mr.
guys hear me?
Gallardo. We can, thank you.
Okay.
Do all commissioners have the information relative to this request?
He only submitted a quick note, an email that just said that he wanted to speak.
Very well. Mr. Gallardo, this is your opportunity then to present your position to the commission relative to your request for the waiver, and you may proceed, sir.
If I may interject
Yeah, I
first,
just
though,
thought it would be easier.
sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
Before you begin, can we have the director tell us what the nature of the violation penalty is? So we know what you're addressing.
Yes, Mr. Gallardo was assessed $1,000 for a late filing of a primary election report.
Thank you.
Any other inquiry by other commissioners? Not, you may proceed, sir. Mr.
Okay,
Gallardo,
so, I just figured it was easier to speak to you guys just because of like the lengthy, complex nature of it, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. Essentially, I filed my candidacy with the local elections office in Wichita, the local county office here, and they gave me the wrong form or the outdated form. It wasn't wrong, it was outdated. And so the ethics commission reached out and said that form was incorrect. And in order for me to redo it, I would need to notarize my affidavit, because I filed an affidavit that I would not be spending more than $1,000. So I didn't need to do the quarterly reports. Or so that being said, they gave me the wrong form, and I said, hey, I just want to make sure that the affidavit is still valid. I just want to make sure that, like, you guys know I'm not going to be spending more than 1,000. I'm not collecting any campaign funds. And essentially, there's this back and forth with the ethics commission by email, phone, where I explained the situation to them. And essentially, it came down to the only way to accept an affidavit would be to notarize it again. However, it was originally notarized at the county office. So I was like, that would cause me to spend money to get it notarized. And I didn't want to open up a trust and use like a make campaign funds usable for that purpose and have any expenditure. So in order to avoid all that, I was just like, hey, is there any way we could work around this? And it wasn't until months later until the ethics commission said I could end my finance and say that I'm not going to be spending any money. And so that at that point, I believe when I spoke to the ethics director, I was able to sign a form that said I'm not going to be spending any money and I haven't had any donations or expenditures. I signed that paperwork. That didn't need to be notarized. I emailed it back, and then we were good from here on out. Um, and so I felt like that should have been a solution since the beginning. But either way, I was given the incorrect form at the county's office, or an out-of-date form. It didn't necessarily fall on me to know that that form was out of date. I feel like the Sedgwick County office is not accepted any type of responsibility in handing out outdated forms, and it shouldn't necessarily fall on my shoulders. I did my best to communicate what my intentions were, and why I wanted to continue the affidavit.
Thank you. Commissioners, any inquiry on behalf of the commission?
Mark, what is your recommendation,
I would recommend denying the request, and I can go into detail if you'd like.
please?
Yes, please.
After the wrong affidavit was submitted, he is correct that he was provided the wrong form. This happens occasionally from election offices. It is a problem. He submitted it, thankfully, he submitted it early. He submitted it in February. We caught it early, thanks to Jen being always on top of things. So our local campaign finance coordinator sent him mail on February 14th, telling him he had the wrong affidavit, which he received. She provided him the correct one and asked him to submit it. At no time between receiving the February letter and the affidavit deadline at the end of July, on July 23rd, did he submit a correct affidavit. So he was required to file the primary election receipts and expenditures report, which he was provided with. He indicated on a phone call with me that he could not access a notary because he isn't a member of a bank, didn't want to pay to use a bank's notary service. He was reminded about the Sedgwick County Election Office free notary for candidates. He indicated that they have inconsistent hours, though it appears they're open from 8 to 5. He repeatedly claimed on this phone call that he could not request off of work at any time during the period from February through July that would allow him to have the correct affidavit notarized. Filing the correct report would not have been much of a challenge, even if he had simply filed the report at the time, because it was zeros. He took in and expended no funds. He initially refused to file it because he had a lot on his plate, according to the phone call I had, though the phone call I had with him was 42 minutes long. With filing a report with no contributions and expenditures would take substantially less time than that. Nonetheless, we did have a resolution that he quickly complied with. We've been telling him all along he could just submit the primary report. It was clear from the conversation he would not submit the October report, the general election report that he would be required to submit. So we extended him a courtesy where we would accept essentially one report to cover the full primary and general period and just let him terminate. And because that was the best way to ensure campaign finance information was provided to the public as rapidly as possible, and to avoid a recurrence of the same discussion back and forth in October when the general election report would be due. I am sympathetic to the issue where someone receives an affidavit that is incorrect and it cannot be accepted. I'm also sympathetic to people having trouble getting access to notaries or taking time off work. However, at some point between February 14th and July 23rd, I am shocked that there is no time to be able to find a notary in that time period, and despite being made aware of the issue, and I would recommend denial as a result.
Your response, sir?
Yeah, so I did communicate throughout the whole time that, the elections office was only open from my working hours. So 9 to 5 is where any normal person is going to be working. And in order for me to take off of work, that would also cost me money. So, right, if I take off of work, that's incurring a loss, that again, it's a result of not necessarily me filling out the wrong forms, but me giving the wrong forms and no opportunity to correct that via like a digital means. I also offered, hey, is there any way we could do this digitally? There's like a bunch of apps like Notarize and things like that that could be used or leveraged to notarize something in a digital way. However, I don't want to incur the expense. So is there any type of like DocuSign or anything that could fulfill those government requirements, in which could be a little bit more convenient for me, where I could just respond either over the phone or email. So I did my best in communicating my limitations and how I wanted to be very careful about how I incur some expenses or losses during the filing of a form that necessarily wasn't my fault, right? It wasn't something that I willingly submitted incorrectly. I had the guidance of the elections office, and I was under the impression everything was done correctly because I am, under their instruction. They told me what to fill out, what to sign, where to mark where, and it explained all the instructions there. So I did understand that if something was out of date, something needed to be corrected. I just didn't understand why there was only essentially one path forward if I didn't want to file expenditure reports, was to get another notarized form. If it was something I could have easily emailed back, I would have had that in as soon as I got that phone call or email. It was just the fact that I was not able to make it to a notary. I spent some time out of town, which was also pretty difficult to even try to communicate that. I communicated with both Jen at the office and Mr. Page there for the same reason, in that I was like, hey, I really need some help here. Obviously I can't make it in. I can't get it notarized. I don't really feel like I need a file expenditure report, because then that would require me to file another one. I don't want to be late. I don't want to disappoint you guys. So I'm trying to find the easiest path forward. And that's why I had submitted the affidavit since the beginning, because I was like, hey, I want this to kind of be one and done. I filed this. I'm not going to receive or spend any money on the campaign. And that's why I started it from the beginning. It became this whole kind of interweb of back and forth communication. The first time it was communicated to me, I didn't fully understand what was wrong with the first one. Based off of the communication I received from Jen, it sounded like the original one had the wrong dates. Like I put the wrong dates, but I guess it was just an outdated form, which I then later learned after talking to Paige and Jen back and forth. But I was very communicated throughout that process and explained my hardships and how maybe the office could help. And it wasn't until the very end where essentially it was almost too late, where I was already assessed a civil penalty and all that good stuff, where they offered to end my finance campaign in order to not have to file another form. And Mr. Page did me the courtesy of filling it out for me. So he put like all zeros, and all I really had to do was sign and send it back, which made it easier. The first time I was sent the form, it was like a PDF that wasn't fillable on the phone. So I had asked, is there any way you guys could leverage DocuSign or some sort of technology where I could make this a little bit easier to fill out on my phone? I was trying to do my best to communicate. There's all the records there that you guys could pull up between Jen and myself by email, and then also the phone calls. I'm not sure if they're recorded, but the communication I had with Jen and Mr. Page. So I hope that I did my job to try to communicate throughout the whole process. It's not like I was not communicating. I was very clear on how I wanted to proceed, and if there was some way they could work with me. And Mrs. Jen had a very rude attitude towards, I just had to do it her way or there was no other way, until I spoke to Mr. Page. Then they offered another alternative, which was ending my campaign, my finance campaign, in order to just not have to file the general elections expenditure report.
Any commissioners have further inquiry?
What is the substantive difference between the old affidavit and the proper affidavit?
That was going to be my question as well.
Sure. So the old affidavit has incorrect deadlines. Indicates it's for a different election period. Historically, we have never accepted an affidavit that was submitted on an incorrect time period. We provide updated forms to the election committees. We're actually looking right now into ways to ensure that we would never need to update this form, that it's something that we have one form that we just use every cycle, we're trying to find if there's ways to reasonably do that, because that initial issue is a recurrent one. I will note, however, in this particular instance, that had Mr. Gallardo just simply filed the primary election report like he was told to do on multiple occasions, he would never have incurred a civil penalty.
So
For the
substantively, then the difference is that a report which was, or sorry, the affidavit that was filed, sworn to on a particular date had a different set of election dates within it.
Correct, yes, it indicates it's for a different election period. It has a different due date on it. Essentially, it has all of those details about a different election cycle. Again,
Was anyone in the office confused or misled by that?
in which office?
In your office?
No. We run into this occasionally where we provide the forms to the election office. Election offices occasionally provide the wrong form, which is why it's always a problem when they wait until the last day to turn it in, because we have to find ways to fix the issue very, very quickly. In this particular case, it was Mr. Gallardo turned it in February and had 5 months to correct the error.
Any further inquiry? Any commissioners wish to express an opinion or motion?
If he pays the fine, does that take care of it? Or does he still have a report that's due?
We accepted a report that covered both the primary and general election period and terminated. He has no more reports due. Right now, his only outstanding amount is a $1,000 civil penalty, not a fine.
Okay. And he can pay that out of his own pocket,
Yes,
or, and he doesn't, and he's terminated, so there are no campaign funds.
and I don't believe he ever received any contributions either, according to his report.
Well, I would move that we waive all but $100 of the $1,000 fine if he pays it within 30 days. If he doesn't pay it within 30 days, then he'll owe the full $1,000.
I second that.
Yep.
Sorry.
A motion and a second on the floor for a waiver of the fine, all except $100 paid within 30 days. If not paid within 30 days of today's date, a fine of $1,000 would remain. Further discussion, commissioners?
If I could make a clarification, it would be 30 days from the day the order is sent, typically.
Right.
Yeah, not today's date.
Not today's date. Any further discussion, commissioners?
No.
Call for the vote. All in favor of the motion?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Matters concluded.
In order to ensure that Commissioner Solbach is able to attend his 2:00 conflict, it may be beneficial to move to executive session now again, and then actually do everything in order after that.
Okay.
I would like to note that there was an
Counsel.
update to the motion that Commissioner Kroll usually reads. So I would just recommend to double check. Everything in here is updated for the executive session motion, but online you'll need to double check the Teams link
No, it's in the shared folder.
in the shared folder.
Okay.
Apologies for the interruption.
Commissioner Kroll, did you hear that comment?
And I have one comment as well, that this is on recommendation of Mr. Rodriguez. Our pleadings could not be updated, but in complaint number 758, the underlying report has been filed at this time as of this morning. Thank you.
All right.
And one other clarification on the motion. There's an additional reference here to an exception to the Open Meetings Act, which I think is just an additional exception to open meetings as opposed to be a privileged communication. It reads a little, I can't tell if it's meant to be the justification, a privileged communication pursuant to this exception to the Open Meetings Act, which is a different
It's-
exception.
The attorney-client privilege and then also the additional exception.
Okay.
So actually, if you want, we could go into executive session just to discuss the second part of this motion.
Do we need to go in doesn't that need to
And
be an
then-
open?
You do both.
Do both what?
Go in executive session for both of those things.
So not technically, because as Commissioner Berger was saying, the exercise of quasi judicial functions is not an exception
Okay.
justifying an executive session. It can justify a different type of recess. So Um,
Okay.
And that's actually the main point of the advice, that we could actually skip executive session and just take a recess to exercise quasi judicial functions.
And
That's what
with
you
that, council,
recommend.
where are we?
You need a motion, Mr. Chairman.
So
Wait.
what is your recommendation, conflict
Yeah,
counsel?
let's
To-
find out what we're going into session for.
To take a recess to discuss, to deliberate on quasi judicial matters,
So it's not an executive session.
not an executive session. Although it will function.
Would it be
Virtually.
okay to treat it as executive session? That is traditionally what we have done as well, so that there can be a combination of the attorney-client discussion within.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will proceed with the motion as is, and you and I can discuss.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's-
Okay,
Well,
so we're good for today, and if there's any issue,
in the future, we'll read.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
It's just the same, different routes to the same
I
path.
just want to make sure we're good for today.
That's my concern. All right.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Kroll, it appears we're prepared for the motion for executive session and suggested time frame.
The motion that I have is 8 lines long and ends at 8 PM. So that's what I have.
That's correct.
I'm going, tell me the time that we have a stop.
155.
Say it again, page
155.
155. Let me get John.
Sure.
155.
Should be plenty of time. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay, here we
stuff.
go. I move that the commission recess this open meeting to executive session with conflict counsel Jay Rodriguez present to discuss matters related to confidential investigations pursuant to KSA 25-4165 and for good causes provided by KAR 19-6-2. Justification for recess to executive session is to consult with counsel for the commission, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 75-4319, subparagraph B, subparagraph 2. And so the commission can exercise quasi-judicial functions when deliberating matters relating to said confidential investigations, as contemplated by KSA 75-4318, subparagraph G, subparagraph 1. The open meeting shall be resumed here at 1:55 PM.
Do we have a second? Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're now in executive session.
Let's see. Yes. Thank you with me.
Commissioner Berger, were you able to record our coming out time?
Yes.
Thank you.
We're good.
Mr. Chairman, I'm willing to make a motion that we find probable cause on all but 758 and that we dismiss 758.
And commissioners, hear the motions from Commissioner Solbach.
Yes.
We then have a motion before the commission to find probable cause on all complaints with the exception of 758. Is that correct, Mr. Solbach?
Yes, yes, Mr. Chairman, and that we dismiss
We
758.
dismiss 758 in light of that. Do we have a second to that motion?
I think my motion dies for the lack of a second.
Hearing no second, the motion dies. Any further action by any other commission members on this matter? That issue is concluded. Mr. Solwalk, I believe you need to leave. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, I do. It's,
Which is right at quorum.
You have a quorum, but not for
Not for
PC.
you.
Right. Okay.
okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner
Be
Solwak.
safe.
Yeah.
See you, John.
That meeting somewhere.
I believe we had just finished my presentation on the legislative recommendations, but had not had any discussion about it.
It appears we've returned to the recommendations of the executive director on legislative matters. Do we have further discussion or questions or input from the commission on those recommendations?
Okay, so I'll start as remaining the most ignorant of the bunch. And that is, I'm going to take advantage, I still want to take advantage of that to say that as I'm learning all the various statutes, how they interplay, I know that I personally do not have a feeling of being able to provide any opinion to the legislature as to how things should or shouldn't be, and therefore would never be able to vote in favor of it at this time. That being said, I would like for there to be a statutory process by which respondents have a time and opportunity to respond to a proposed complaint through the non-open meeting sessions, so that we can evaluate the various standards of review and make them meaningful. So that's I say that, and looking through the list, the social media thing feels very pregnant with complications. Exemptions seem to be also a very complicated sort of subject. The federal side of things feels like we start to reach into jurisdiction over federal campaigns. Closure, jurisdictional issues come to mind, and then expanding to PACs and parties having liability really is also an expansive grab as to more individuals and more pocketbooks. So I sat through, or at least played in the background, the two session meetings, which I think Mark will talk about later. And I'll just say I learned a lot, I heard a lot, and I know that I don't know a recommendation to make.
Thank you, Commissioner Berger. Commissioners, Mr. Chair.
I guess this is Patty. I guess I would say with respect to the cleanup items, especially the ones that this might be the second or third go around on those, on some of those, I wish that they would get the attention they deserve, so that we can all feel more comfortable with the statutes and so forth that we have to deal with, and the public as well. And those individuals who are subject to these statutes will understand it.
Those two comments, do we have any further discussion or request for action?
These will be formally approved at the annual report in November, but
So this is just for
Hearing
discussion purposes then?
correct.
Director? Okay,
Correct.
well, thank you for that.
Very enough further, shall we move forward?
We could go back to the civil penalty waiver discussion, or I can just finish the executive director's report. There's two more items on it. Either way.
I would prefer you finish the executive director's report, please.
The second item is one that we briefly talked about in kind of vagaries at the last meeting, and now I've put some, at request of the commission, I put together some specifics. Right now, this is the election sensitive late report policy draft. That it's just a one pager. The general thought process here is that the historical practice of the commission, except in the rare instance where someone is a persistent late filer, someone who always is filing late, they're only filing their report at the last possible second to get their complaint dismissed. And historically, the commission approaches these reports as the goal is simply to gain compliance, get them to file their reports. As long as they filed it before a hearing occurs, the commission historically dismisses those complaints. However, it's worth noting that on primary and general election reports, where someone is appearing on the ballot, voters statutorily have a right to this public information about their campaign finance activities of the candidates. It informs people's voting behavior. And if a report is filed after the primary or general election, then those voters are permanently deprived of that information in able to inform their voting. So any of those reports where someone appears on a primary or general election would be considered a election sensitive report. Someone who does not have a primary, it's not an election sensitive report. This is only times where someone's name is appearing on the ballot for the primary or general. This policy says that if a complaint is filed and the report is not filed before noon the day prior to the election, the commission won't dismiss the complaint just because it was filed. They can dismiss it for other reasons. It doesn't limit anything the commission does otherwise. It doesn't say, if someone says, I was late getting it in because I was in the hospital or something like that, the commission can dismiss per normal. It can dismiss for any of the reasons other than it just will not dismiss just because a report is on file, like they currently do. At the hearing, the commission can consider aggravating and mitigating factors, anything like that. But if all else being equal, if the report is filed, the FEC has a formula they use for calculating administrative fines. It depends on a lot of factors that occasionally are a little complicated. But really, this is a stripped down version of this. And again, this policy there's a lot of flexibility to it. I put some numbers in just to see what people thought. But the idea is that there's a base amount that anyone would be fined, say $100, and then plus some percentage of contributions received during that period up to the statutory maximum. This is basically what the FEC does. And the goal here is that if you are filing a report with zeros, there really wasn't that much limited from the public. But if you have a report with $25,000 of contributions, that's a lot of information that the public and voters were denied. And that sum would be increased by 25% for any previous campaign finance reporting violation, specifically a finding of a violation at a fine hearing. So that's the general thought process, is that if something is an election sensitive report and there isn't another reason to dismiss it, they have to come to the commission, explain why that report was too late for voters to be able to access. And if the commission views this as a violation, then they would generally operate around a formula like this. So that's just, again, just kind of for discussion, but this is kind of the written out version of the discussion that we had at the last meeting.
Any inquiry of the director? Hearing none, would you move to the next point?
Sure. Is this something that we should adopt, or they should consider adopting as a guidance document, or is this something that?
If the commission wants this to have any type of binding on future commissioners, then there would need to be some, at least adoption of a guidance document would require the commissioners to justify why there's a variance from that. So that's something to keep in mind. Otherwise, if they want complete flexibility, this could just be an informal internal policy.
Yeah. So if people wanted to do something like this, I would ask that it wouldn't apply until 2024, just because we're right about to have an election deadline, and I'm not someone who's going to change the rules on someone right before we have an election or a campaign finance report. But if someone wants to adopt it as a formal guidance document, that's something we could do, or it can just be a informal policy, unless the consensus of the commission is simply not to do this at all.
Commission, your preference? There appears to be three options.
I actually like the idea of removing one of the discretionary waivers from the commission as a whole. I'm not as sure about the financial side of it, but ironically, because it feels too low, quite honestly. I mean, that feels like a liquidated damage that gets calculated into a campaign, and you simply make the decision that I'm going to violate it because it's only going to cost me $100 plus 5%.
Cost of doing business.
Exactly. So in that sense, that feels almost like, say, oddly restrictive.
And the base number, the percentages, any of that could change, or again, to just abolish the formula entirely and just avoid the formula.
Right. Just thinking out loud with everybody.
No, I'm just trying to provide structure as well.
Yeah. So I mean, like I say, I like the idea. Would this, as drafted up right now on the letterhead, be the guidance document, or would there be a separate document?
Either way, this would be sufficient to constitute a guidance document as is. Guidance documents can look like all sorts of different things, but this could be sufficient to meet that purpose if that's something that the commission wants to do. And I'm not making a recommendation one way or the other. I just think that I think that it's a good idea to head this way, but I don't know I don't have a recommendation about the path of adoption, whether it should be formal, informal, whether these numbers should change, anything like that.
And Caitlin, are you confident that our statutory authority would allow for a multiple or an additor to the penalty?
Well, I guess that's something I would need to look into a little bit more, since we have more, the commission had the discretion regarding the waiver, as opposed to the penalty, but that formula could apply in a waiver context as well. It would just be the flip, right? That you would calculate it.
Though we're not really talking about waivers, we're talking about civil fines.
That's right, the
Yeah.
fines, yes. Yeah, this is within, I believe, the discretion, as long as it's, not going over the caps that have been established by the legislature, the 5, 10, and 15,000.
Well, absent any other discussion, I think I would just move to table it for the next meeting. So I know we've chewed on it once already, but it's still an important change.
Yeah, and I can look into the justification on just the jurisdiction of the commission to make this type of policy change. I'll provide that as well.
And maybe we could solicit some public comment. I know it's few and far between, but still.
Well, there's always comfort in having direction that we can rely upon, but there's also the comfort of having a discretionary opportunity from the judicial point of view. At times, the only way to deal with this is with discretion. But I understand the comfort level of saying, this is where we are, this is why we're here, this is what we do, and this is why we do it. Is also clear to the public, more clear than I did it because I believe discretionarily that's what we should have done. Or part of itself. So we have a suggestion that we simply table this matter to the next meeting. Would that be a motion on your part, Commissioner Bergen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have a motion to table this matter.
I would second that motion.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Commissioner.
Great, thanks a lot, everyone. The third and last one, this was a request from a commissioner for geographical breakdowns and discussion regarding civil penalty distributions in the state to see if there's different approaches we might take to help increase or decrease civil penalties, increase filing, proper filing. So obviously, every time you're doing geographic analysis, population has to have some sort of consideration because Johnson County has more civil penalties than Greeley County, since Johnson County has 500 times the people and a lot more candidates. Generally, if civil penalties tend to impact every candidate identically, a civil penalty map should generally resemble a Kansas population heat map. For this purpose, what we're talking about here, I use numbers from 2018 to 2022. PACs were excluded because honestly, PACs skew the data a lot more towards larger counties, which we're already doing. A large majority of PACs operate out of Shawnee, Johnson, Sedgwick, Douglas, and not a lot of them outside of those areas. So you'll see on page 2, on the top you have, it's from 2016, but it's still relatively accurate, that there's a population heat map of Kansas, and under it you have essentially the heat map of our civil penalties. And it does tend to resemble it. There's a few outliers, and I'm going to talk about them in a moment on page 3, but generally speaking, it's exactly what you would expect. There are, where there are more people, there are more penalties, and there are some, there's a few counties that are worth mentioning here, that Wyandotte, Shawnee, and Johnson, obviously quite a few. Sedgwick County is in the next tier below that. But so looking at it purely by the number in a county is less helpful, I think, than trying to identify what I did on page 3, which is their outliers from the expected number. This is not rigorous statistical analysis. This is more or less playing with numbers, but it's interesting nonetheless. On average, for about every 19,000 people in a county, in this time frame, one civil penalty assessment is expected. And so you have more or less the counties with the best performing candidates, treasurers, and party committees in this 4-year period, and the counties with the worst performing candidates, treasurers, and party committees, just statistically on how many civil penalties were assessed. Sedgwick County wins the award for the absolute best performance of candidates, treasurers, and party committees. By population, they would be expected to have almost 28 penalties, and in this frame, they actually only had 13. And this is even despite the fact that the Wichita School Board is something that is uniquely subject to the Campaign Finance Act, and it's the only school board in the state that is. We don't assess a lot of penalties for Wichita School Board candidates. I think it's been a while since we've done that at all. It's just something that doesn't happen very often. So Sedgwick County gets some sort of award for doing a very good job filing on time. Butler
Josh,
County,
Mark, do you think that's because people from Citrus County are just better politicians?
I think they're just scared of you, Commissioner Schonifer.
Right.
So the second one would be Butler, which is it's the most population a county has with no penalties at 68,000 people. You'd expect about almost 4 penalties, and they didn't have any. Douglas County also very good performance comparatively, not quite as good as Sedgwick in terms of the departure from what you'd expect. On the flip side, you have I use this word very vaguely, worst performing candidates, treasurers, and party committees. Shawnee and Wyandotte top out that list at 20 and 19 penalties apiece, which is about 10 or 11 more penalties than you would expect for those counties. Wyandotte is a little different because they have the unified government, which covers different seats. They also have the Board of Public Utilities in Wyandotte County. Shawnee County, I don't really have a lot of explanation for why they're on top. But again, this is just the nature of the way these numbers fall. A few differences is enough to cause a pretty substantial departure. For example, if you look at Dickinson County, you'd expect 1 penalty for a county of 18,000 people. They had 7, which looks like a lot. But remember, 5 of those 7 were for the same candidate and their treasurer, and 2 of them were another candidate and treasurer. So just by the way, if you went over, the next 10, 15 years, I think it'd be very unlikely that Dickinson County would look like an outlier. Same with Elk and Anderson counties. Those are 2 penalties for 1 person, but in Elk County, there's 2,500 people. So that's a lot per person. So again, it's interesting to look at, but it is notable that if Johnson County had a similar civil penalty rate as Sedgwick County, 20 fewer penalties would have been assessed in this time period, which is a huge departure. The big difference in comparing the two that I noticed, Sedgwick County has almost no repeat offenders in this time frame, and Johnson County is almost all repeat offenders. Over half of the penalties assessed in this time frame were repeat offenders, someone who missed the primary and the general report, or they were just assessed multiple times in just this 4-year time frame, which is a lot. So whether there's something in the water in Johnson County or not, I can't speak to. I'm a proud Johnson County resident myself, so maybe that's why I don't have a lot of analysis as to why that's happening. But it's interesting to look at the numbers and see how it plays out. But I think I can certainly take any questions. I did a pretty deep dive into this data and can answer other questions as well, or take different slices at the data as well.
Commissioners, I find that he responded to the request. Any surprises?
Did you break it down into the type of race?
The seats, yeah, it was interesting. The problem with doing 2018 to 2022 is there are some candidates that there are some races that appear twice, like state representative appears twice. There are some that don't. For example, some county seats that are 4 years. Senate obviously would only appear once in that time frame. Things like that you wouldn't really run into very often. So if you break it down by seat, there are some things you can see. PACs are. There's a lot of PACs that were assessed penalties, a lot of state representatives. That's probably just without the numbers right in front of me, I'd say about 60% of the penalties between those 2 entities alone. I know PACs had something just shy of 40. I think representatives were right around that range as well.
I'd be interested in seeing the races involved and,
Sure.
and what kind of violations there are.
I'll do races and amounts so you can see, because usually if someone's hit the maximum penalty of either 300 or 1,000, there you can tell that that's someone who mostly has disappeared. They're just not responding to anything, usually.
Great. Thank you
Thank
for the request. Now we'll move to the next agenda item, which is, where are we now?
The waiver discussion, we skipped that at the beginning,
Okay, we're now back to the civil penalty waiver discussion.
and there is at least one public comment as well when we get there.
Okay, and where are they?
That's Commissioner. So I think Commissioner Berger may want to lead this discussion.
Oh.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
That's
I
all right.
wasn't sure
That's right.
if you needed it.
So I would just say it's the same thing that we had submitted before. If anyone's had a chance to review it, comment on it. Have we received any written public comment?
No.
Okay. And then the ultimate question is whether we want to have something like this, and if so, the manner in which we would want to formalize it.
Comments, commission?
I'm biased, but I like it. This is Kyle. I say
Where's
we
my band?
roll with it. I say we roll with
Where's
it.
Jimmy?
Whatever we need to do.
Well, if you're biased, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make that motion. I'll
Very
step
well.
up and do it. I think that it's nice and clean. And if it doesn't work, we can always tinker with it. But right now, I think it feels good. It cleans up something that for too long a time has been real or apparent to be arbitrary and capricious. Just kind of how does the body feel on a given Wednesday when it gathers to extend varying degrees of grace and mercy depending on circumstances that are not consistent.
Well, they may be consistently inconsistent, but they could be consistent.
Exactly.
So,
I think you're exactly right. Either way, slice it.
so your motion, please?
Do we want to, let me interrupt. Do we want to have public comment? I saw
That's
conversation.
exactly what I
about
was checking on.
I saw our director doing that. Mr. Nye, do you have any comment?
Yeah, it's mainly just a thank you. Again, Josh and I, attorney, have practiced in front of you as a quasi judicial body from time to time. And anytime the commission can engage in more specificity and kind of rule of law activity where the public and practitioners can know what we're getting into and how we can advise our clients, it's all for the better, especially given the type of conduct that you're regulating. I would just ask a couple things. The first is, I won't necessarily stop here. I think that the legislature is engaged in a very in-depth discussion about competing principles that I think we all hold. First of all, wanting to encourage participation in public life and in the political activities and campaign finance and public office, but at the same time, and not burden that, but at the same time regulate and give maximum transparency and deter corruption. So those are competing principles. Those are something that the legislature and multiple people in this room are involved in over there to find the right balance. And I think that the more the commission can do this, not only through forms and not only through policies, but specifically through advisory opinions or rules and regs, the public and the bar is going to be helped by that. So I'd encourage you to continue down that path. And thank you. The only one question I would have would be with regard to the hardship affidavit. I would be concerned that if at all possible, that could not be public record. I know I just said transparency, maximum transparency, but I do think that requiring a candidate or a public office holder to basically declare that they're impoverished and list their specific monthly housing allowance as well as their income in a public form it may be something that is at least currently contemplated as against public policy in the core exceptions. There is an exception for personal information that would, I have it in front of me. Just bring it up here. Public records containing information of a personal nature where the public disclosure thereof would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. If there is another exception that may cut against that, that's something you should consider. But I think in affidavits, specifically for indigent defense, I'm not sure if those are filed under seal, but those have sensitive data as well. And so just a consideration there, even if it's provided in a redacted form, if it's submitted, I don't think it would necessarily have to be submitted at open meeting, or it would be an open record. So just something to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Nye. Any other public comment? I apologize. I'm so used to looking across the field and I don't see public. Thank you. Commissioners, comments or thoughts on the public comment? Does that change your motion at all, Commissioner?
Yeah, that's something that we struggled with when we were putting this together. And I wouldn't be opposed to consideration of it being something that is protected, safeguarded to the maximum extent possible for use only in making that determination. I see no problem with that. Do you, Commissioner Berger?
I would agree. I agree with you.
Okay, then I appreciate the comment, and I think that accordingly, and I withdraw my motion and take it up next month on the 29th. In the meantime, we can come up with language, unless you have it right now, language that you would propose.
So my understanding, Kyle, is Commissioner Crowell, you have withdrawn your motion at this point. Would ask to table this matter to next month's meeting to consider appropriate language in light of the public comment.
Correct, unless someone has language right now that they would just use in place of that all caps language right under instructions.
Very well.
This form and supplemental
For procedural matters, I would
documents.
then consider your motion to table to be present at this time. Do we have a motion or do we have a second of that motion?
To table?
The table.
I would second that. I do second that.
Any further discussion on that particular motion? The prior motion had been withdrawn. If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The matters tabled the next meeting for further discussion and perhaps review of appropriate language. Not to assume, but will the subcommittee submit some suggested language relative to this form then at that point?
May we on it just defer to Caitlin to have the appropriate language that would allow for the financial hardship declaration to be protected? I think that's the only change.
You may have been the chair of that committee, so that defer, and I notice that our council has eagerly agreed to that. Very well, council, we'll look forward to your language.
All righty.
All right.
This is Patty. I have one other question following up on what was brought up is what about the medical information that someone is disclosing as well as natural disaster or theft information, whether any of that should also be disclosed or could be redacted?
I think those are points well taken. This is Kyle, and I think we'll just take a privacy run through this waiver request form from beginning to end, all four corners.
Agreed.
So I'll redirect Caitlin then to have all encompassing language relative to any material that we feel might be sensitive.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Very
Of
well,
course.
thank you, Caitlin. You now have another direction or directive for whatever that is without further authority behind it.
Well, thank you very much.
Great point,
That's-
Patty. This is Kyle.
Where are we now?
Civil penalty
Civil
assessments.
penalties. All right.
As with our new practice, I'm not going to read them all. There aren't as many this time, though. You've got candidates and treasurers. There's 4 amended reports. There's 1 PAC registration. And then you've got 3 lobbyist penalties for late filing of the September report. That's all I have on penalty assessments.
No action required. Any further discussion from commissioners? If not, we move to lobbyists.
We did lobbyist civil penalties. The next would be Tyler Raleigh's civil penalty waiver request.
All right, thank you. I missed that.
Hey, Mark.
Sorry.
Mark, sorry. Hey, Mark, do you hear me? That's Mark Schoffer.
Yes.
Hey, can we take a 2-minute break? I've been going about an hour and a half and I could use that break right now.
We
I will so
will,
move.
the chair will take a recess until 2:35.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
We'll reconvene at 2:35. Thank you. In the October 25, 2023 commission meeting, and the last matter we have before us is, again, are we on?
Raleigh's penalty waiver request.
Live?
Yep.
All right, we're now back to session. We're now live. Next matter, civil penalty request, waiver request.
You have Tyler Raleigh, a lobbyist for who's assessed $550. He indicates he was ill with COVID at the time and filed the report. It is filed. Just spoke to the lobbyist desk. They have no issue with this. I would recommend waiver pursuant to historical practice of the commission on a health waiver request.
We have recommendation from the executive director relative to Mr. Raleigh's request. Do we have any discussion or motion from any commissioners?
I would so move.
And I would just note that he is a professional lobbyist, albeit, quote unquote volunteer, but someone who goes in front of our legislators, presumably routinely, certainly in matters of interest, which, should carry some responsibility with it.
We have a motion. We do not yet have a second. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. We have the comment from Commissioner Berger. Any further discussion or comment? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
It appears the ayes carry it. The motion is approved. Next matter.
It's the civil fine hearing.
Ben?
So we originally had a civil fine hearing scheduled for complaint number 748, which is what you all in the last meeting, probable cause was found. However, due to service issues, we have moved that hearing to, we haven't been able to get service at all of the respondent, but we now have the correct address and we know for sure that is where he lives. So we will provide notice of a hearing for the November meeting. And ensure that he has his ability to respond and due process is served and all that good stuff. So we will be bumping that to the November meeting.
Very well. Any further executive session?
That's all.
We have no further requests for executive session. Our next meeting date would be November 29, 2023, and that is an adjustment from our standard fourth Wednesday. Hopefully everyone has been given notice of that and have that on their calendars. We should be well satiated with the turkey and the loss and wins of our favorite teams. But with that, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second,
Second.
Kyle.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Those
Aye.
opposed, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much, commissioners, for your attendance and your participation and the opportunity in this matter and for my tolerance and my taking over at the last moment. We look forward to seeing you all in
Well
November.
done. Well done.
Thank you.
Great job.
You.
Thank you.
All right. Stay healthy, everyone.
Bye-bye.
You too. Thanks.
Hold it at 2:37.
Bye.
And actually, I've been trying to go over the trip and for the